What do you think of when you hear the name Jimmy Stewart?
Iconic voice.
A man comes home looking for a little peace and quiet, and what happens? Blah, blah, blah.
The movie that comes to mind, Rear Window, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Philadelphia Story.
James Stewart, to me, is a legend.
He's usually the hero.
Someone that just had such a stage presence.
Everybody in this country killed crazy? Here!
His body shape, the lankiness. You don't see actors like that today.
He captures you in the film without even knowing what the movie's going to be about. He's an underrated actor.
James Maitland Stewart. He is one of the most iconic stars of all time, but he broke ground by becoming one of the biggest stars of the era, joining the military from his love of planes and aviation. He actually wasn't working to be an actor, but rather went to school for architecture. He was encouraged by those around him, including his good friend, fellow Hollywood icon Henry Fonda, who saw something unique in him that he should pursue acting. Here we explore what made Jimmy iconic and why he will always be remembered. Let us start with his persona. What made Jimmy so special? Well, he had an iconic voice for sure.
Naturally. What? Naturally.
But more than just his voice was his vulnerability that made audiences connect with him. As Kimnovac said, whom she co-starred with him in Vertigo, he was what I wanted my America to represent. You wouldn't take your eyes off the screen when Jimmy started stammering. You didn't believe he was acting for one moment. He might have been the guy down the block. It was his boyish charm, that enhancing innocence. This came from his humble beginning. His father owning a hardware store and his mother being a talented pianist. His parents were churchgoers, which instilled an immaculate set of morals. He loved building model planes, he played with chemistry sets, he dabbled in magic. This would influence his family type of roles throughout his entire career. At the break of World War I, while his father served in the army, Jimmy took the patriarchal role and would take care of their family's hardware store. He would also find a new interest, which would be writing plays, which he actually stopped once his father came back from the service. When Jimmy enrolled in Princeton, he became involved with an amateur performing society, eventually becoming an actor in the troupe. He later caught the attention from a producer for playing a gangling young man, and was offered other parts in many plays. Legend has it that heddahopper saw Jimmy in a play called Divided by Three in New York, told the bosses at MGM about him, and signed him to a 3-month contract. In one of his earliest roles, he plays alongside Spencertracy as a news reporter. His next movie starred him along with opera power couple Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy in Rose-Marie. He played MacDonald's criminal brother, in which he becomes a huge rift between our screen lovers.
Come on.
Oh, no, you can't do this. I'm begging you. Don't do this. Don't let this come between us for the rest of our lives.
You want to kiss your sister goodbye?
We can tell just through his eyes the intensity, which will only become a huge part of his persona. His voice would tremble with emotion that would send goosebumps to his audience. This kind of rugged persona was similar to his performance in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the iconic scene where Jimmy presented to the Senate.
Well, I'm not licked. And I'm going to stay right here and fight for this lost cause. Even if this room gets filled with lies like these. And the Taylors and all their armies come marching into this place. Somebody will listen to me.
Another film that exemplified this rugged persona was in the Western film noir, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, in which Jimmy also has his gangly, neurotic persona shining through. He plays a similar role, both lawmen trying to fight for what is right. On his rise to fame, Jimmy was able to star alongside some of the most iconic stars of the silver screen, including Jeanharlow, Clark Gable, and so many more. Jimmy had a versatility in his roles, as well as his adaptability despite him being the everyday man. Jimmy played another reporter, but this time in the romantic comedy The Philadelphia Story. He plays Mike Connor, who was assigned to cover Katharine Hepburn's Tracy Lord's wedding. Jimmy shows both his tenacity as what is expected to be a reporter, but he learns how to be vulnerable, falling in love with Hepburn's Tracy. He even serenades his rendition of Over the Rainbow to her.
Someday over the rainbow.
This is reminiscent to a scene in Born to Dance, singing the song Easy to Love to Eleanor Powell. These collections of soft but vulnerable characters made Jimmy stand out. His eyes told every person in the audience what he was feeling and how he was able to connect to every character. After he was drafted into the Air Force, upon his return, his roles dramatically changed. While in the military, he trained with bomber pilots, which once he came back, he said, "I had some close calls. The whole war was a close call." He wanted his first role to reflect some of these emotions he felt during the war. Plus, he was out of pictures for more than 4 years. He wanted to become a freelance actor rather than tied to any studio, so his return was presented to him by Frank Capra in a film called It's a Wonderful Life. This was one of his most complex roles to date. Even though it starts out as a romantic role, George Bailey has some demons he still has to deal with. Jimmy related to George, in which he had to sacrifice for his family, like needing to step in to help with the family store. Later in the film, George prays for help. This is one of the most iconic and powerful scenes, as he was only able to do it one take, as it took a huge emotional toll on him.
Dear Father in heaven, I'm not a praying man, but if you're up there and you can hear me, show me the way.
This again proved his unique vulnerability in how he connected his personal life to his roles. This film also showed the transition of all war veterans trying to come back to an idyllic life, as Capra was also a war veteran, so he knew what Jimmy went through. The next biggest phase Jimmy entered in his career was he became a Western hero, almost at times rivaling the likes of John Wayne in the 50s. Passing his persona of boyish charm was a more gruff and at times bitter characters, like the one he played in Winchester 73. These kind of complex characters gave director Alfred Hitchcock a new way to look at Jimmy, as an injured cameraman in Rear Window, where he watches the lives of his neighbors, and then into the film Vertigo, in which he plays a retired cop and has to learn how to cope with his vertigo condition and becomes super obsessed with Kimnovac's character. These roles show the audience a more neurotic side of his performances, in which no one has seen before. In contrast, he was able to fulfill a passion role and played his idol, Charles Lindbergh, in the film Spirit of St. Louis, which connected his childhood love of the aviator as well as his love for the planes. As the 60s and 70s came, Jimmy's films turnout started slowing down, as he was focusing more on TV and his personal life. His film career received the ultimate reward in 1985, where Jimmy received an honorary Oscar for his extensive film career. One of the traits people liked about James Stewart was his likability. Just like how modern audiences respond to Tom Hanks and the range of his roles, Jimmy played a wide variety of characters. What was also seen as a slight handicap had become one of Jimmy's trademarks, which was his tall and lanky body. His stature helped him in one of the most famous roles, Harvey, in which he played alongside a fictitious rabbit. In it, the audience is presented the question, who is sane and who is actually insane? Jimmy plays Elwood P. Dowd. His family tried to get him institutionalized, but later realized that life would be much more interesting and fun with how he is, rather than if he was quote-unquote fixed. This speaks to every watcher by letting people know it is okay to have something nutty in your life to keep it interesting, rather than having everything normal, which would just make people crabby. Harvey has become synonymous with Jimmy Stewart, just like George Bailey, as well as Jefferson Smith. You always know what he is thinking in his deep blue eyes. His voice is one of the most impersonated voices from the entire golden age of Hollywood.
Jane!
Yet, no one can capture his shy drawl, his deep passion when confronted with trouble or with love. I can't say what is my favorite Jimmy Stewart movie, as there is so many to choose from. People should always remember Jimmy. There will never be another actor like him again.